recorded live from deep in the heart of Texas. Welcome to another CloverTac podcast with a conversation that brings together the firearm industry and the community. Are you ready for the show? Well then, let's go.
What's up, crew? Welcome to another CloverTac podcast powered by our friends at Anderson Manufacturing. And as always, we'll talk more about them later on. Matter of record, it is September 23rd, 2024, as we're recording this episode. So thanks to everybody that's filing in, joining live. If you are in the wonderful world of replay, remember, there is a comment section down below. Speaking of that wonderful world of replay, keep in mind that replays will only be available on the CloverTac podcast channel, not the main CloverTac channel, and out there in the audio podcast world, like, I don't know, Firearms Radio Network, which is a place that we're proud to be members of. So go check out all of the fine 2A gun-related podcast over there, firearmsradio.net. With that out of the way, let's get to the man of the hour in here, Dr. David Yamane. Hopefully I said that right.
Very well done. Yes, thank you.
And I was thinking about, leading up to having you on. First of all, thanks for joining us today. We do appreciate it. And was thinking leading up that, one of my first questions, usually right out of the gate on my podcast, at least for first time guests, is we always kind of talk about their journey as firearm owners, their journey as gun owners. Did they grow up? What was life like? Growing up. Your book, Gun Curious, which I have not read yet, but from what I'm hearing anyway, is pretty much that story.
That's right.
So I want to give you the floor just as a general introduction here for a couple of minutes, if you would, David, and just let people know the highlights of who you are.
Yeah. Well, the book title is Gun Curious, but the subtitle is A Liberal Professor's Surprising Journey Inside America's Gun Culture. And, I always say the most surprising part of that journey is that I took it at all, because I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area of California, completely outside of any kind of gun ownership or gun culture. There were people near where I lived who were hunters or who owned defensive firearms. It was not any part of my own life or the people that I associated with. And, then I went to college, graduated from UC Berkeley as a sociology major. So, you're talking about the left side of the political spectrum and then a little bit more left from there. And spent my whole professional career in universities among other sociologists largely. And, that insulated me from any real contact with guns, gun owners, or gun culture. And it wasn't until 2005 when I moved to North Carolina that guns sort of came on guns, this sort of thing. And, then I started seeing billboards for gun ranges and gun stores and, advertising for the gun show at the local Coliseum. So, I started to have this feeling, maybe around 2010, like I was the only person in North Carolina who didn't own a gun, but, had no personal experience. I had a couple of personal experiences we can talk about if you want in 2010, but that really led me to going to learn how to shoot a gun in January of 2011 when I was 42 years old. First time I ever saw, touched, or fired a gun. And, I had no real intention of becoming a gun owner or getting into gun culture from that experience. I was really kind of thought that they were a little bit dangerous and just wanted to know how they worked. But from that moment, I enjoyed the experience. I wanted to, shoot more, learn more about shooting. And, now I'm 13 years later, and, I've spent 13 years of my life on this personal and sort of scholarly journey inside American gun culture.
Right. Well, it is kind of an addiction, right? In a way. It seems like a lot of people I hear, they pull that trigger for the first time, and it's I don't know, it's a life-changing moment a lot of times. And they get the one firearm, and then, oh wow, this is great for the self-defense, whatever purpose, right, that they've decided that they were going down that road. And And then next thing you know, I want this one just because it looks cool, and I want this one because I can go hunting, and I want this one because it's fun on the range, and I want this one because ammo's cheap, right?
Right. Yeah. And that sounds very familiar to me because, the challenge of making the hole in the paper where I was aiming, that I only shot probably fewer than 50 rounds that first day, but with each shot I was, getting a little closer, getting a little closer. And so that's an inherent challenge, right? Whether it's if you're throwing horseshoes or darts or, I play tennis or whatever you're doing, like it's a challenge, and
Mhm.
you want to meet that challenge. But then once you're off and running, there's so many different, firearms for so many different purposes. I actually have a chapter that, I should say, the book is written, I think, for a broad audience. So
Mhm.
people who are gun owners have been reading the book, and I think appreciating my particular story, but also trying to write to people like who I used to be, liberal non-gun owners, to say, this is why guns make sense to people. This is how I went from owning 0 guns for 42 years to owning 13 guns, within a period of a few years. And
Mhm.
that's something that if you're involved with guns, you understand exactly why, as you just explained. But if you
Right.
don't understand why someone would own a single gun, you obviously can't understand why they would own 13 or 30 or 300.
Mhm. Now, I want to back up just for a second here, if you don't mind. The When you were talking about growing up, you were talking about going to school and being in in and around liberals, right? The liberal ideology. As far as um, the perspective or whatever on guns and gun culture that you were around in those specific circumstances, was it anti-gun at all, or was it more so agnostic, or what did that kind of look like?
Yeah. Well, for me, it was very much, it was just indifference. It wasn't
Okay.
that people were, walking around complaining about guns all the time. Although, that certainly happens within liberal circles, but, the particular circles I was in, it was more just kind of indifference. We had, other concerns. When I was growing up, we were concerned about global nuclear annihilation. We didn't care about small arms. We were like, who's
Right.
going to set off the ICBMs first? And so those were our big concerns. But if I think if anybody would have ever asked, like, hey, what about guns? I think I would have had a basically reflexive liberal response of like, well, nothing much good comes of them, right? So why do we have them?
Mhm.
Obviously, I write from the perspective of a liberal gun owner, and this is 20% of all gun owners self-identify as liberals. So I don't want to even paint liberals with too broad a brush, but certainly, liberal academics, liberals who spend most of their time in the university, they tend to come from non-gun backgrounds and really have no fundamental understanding of why people have guns.
Mhm. And what would you say with that 20%? What would you say are some of the differences between those and maybe folks like myself, a lifelong firearm owner? I don't ever remember a time that wasn't a part of day to day life, and I wasn't around them.
Yeah.
What are some of the differences there as far as their, I guess, their mentality or the outlook or the way they approach it?
Yeah. Well, so, some segment of those are also lifelong gun owners, right? And they,
Could
oftentimes,
be.
they would come from rural areas. They're hunters. I think we, when in some language, talk about them as being kind of gun culture 1.0. They recreationally shoot, they target shoot, they hunt. But, with this large surge of new gun owners coming into the population, those people are more liberal than existing gun owners.
Hmm.
So, then we say those new gun owners who self-identify as politically liberal are actually more similar to current gun owners in certain ways in terms of being very defensively oriented. But a lot of them, they're more women, they're more racial minorities, they're more urban. They tend to own fewer firearms, and oftentimes they just own one gun, and it's a handgun. So these are some things that make them distinct in terms of their gun ownership and their those practices. But the other thing about liberal gun owners is that there's this negotiation with the political sphere, right? So largely agreeing with the, sort of say the Democratic Party in general on a lot of political issues, but then departing ways on gun rights issues. Although many, I think liberal gun owners may be more receptive to government regulation than conservative gun owners are. So, I think that's something that people haven't explored far enough yet. I don't think it's something I hope to do, more in the future. But we do see, for example, higher levels of agreement on certain gun control policies among liberals, including those who own guns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that as far as the tent of the tent of gun ownership, the 2A side of that tent, the staunch 2A side of that tent, I think that's the wedge, right? That's the thing that frustrates, I think, a lot of hardened 2A activists when it comes to the liberal firearm owners. Is you've got the extremes on any given side always, and you've got your cold dead hands shall not be infringed crowd, and they don't understand the mindset of the liberal firearm owners who says, okay, well, what's wrong with a ban on certain firearms, or what's wrong with extensive background checks, or what's wrong. And I don't know. I think that's something that we face again within our own tent.
Yeah.
That I'm not real sure. I haven't come up with an answer to that. I haven't come up with how do we kind of get people to see things from that other perspective. And I guess the bigger question is, do we even need to? Is that dangerous potentially to try to even move into that direction?
Yeah. I think, I like to think of conceptual dichotomies like liberal, conservative, gun owner, not, these things, they help us make sense of a world that's really complicated. But we also have, reality is more gray, and, where there's distribution. So, you take conservative gun owners, some of them favor some gun control policies, some are very staunchly 2A. You take liberal gun owners, a smaller percentage are staunchly 2A, but I know many liberal gun owners who are, very staunchly 2A, all the way across the spectrum to more amenable to gun regulations. But I think the challenge of being a liberal gun owner politically is, where do you put gun rights in the whole hierarchy of all of the things that you care about? And that's where I think it gets really tough, where maybe if you're a conservative gun owner, it's easy for you to vote a certain way to protect your gun rights, and it's obviously which way you would vote to protect your gun rights, and it's not the Democratic way. But then what about if you have other issues that you care about? Then how do you weigh that when you go to the ballot box? And then, it's really it's a challenge, because there's no party, there's no individual, who gives you everything that you want. And so you kind of hold your nose and go in and vote. I wish it was easier that I could just, like, I hate guns and I'm for these other things, and so bang, pull the lever. But if you care about guns, you care about gun rights, and you care about women's rights, or the rights of other minority groups, or whatever your issues are, it just becomes a lot harder. And I think an expansive 2A tent is great, but I think it does sort of hide some of those underlying tensions, like that you're all in the tent, but maybe you're in, like, standing in different parts of the tent, not talking to each other, right?
Right. Yeah. It's we kind of have our own cliques, I guess, or the type thing, something like that. You're exactly right. It's that kind of that high school mentality, right? The jocks are over here, the nerds are over here, the cheerleaders are over here. The book club, the whatever, the chess team, that sort of thing. Right. It's all divided out, and unfortunately, that's just something that for the longest, I mean, we've had to deal with. And I think you hit on something that was important, was especially in modern times, as we bring more and more new people right into gun ownership. You've got varying reasons that people are coming in, right, and becoming gun owners. Some of it's traumatic experience. Some of it is just an awakening. Some of it may be a shift in distrust of authority or the government or whatever it might be. You've got all these varying reasons, and then you've got the areas that they live in playing a factor. You've just got all of these roles, right? That weigh
Hmm.
on these people, and the more, I guess, what I'm getting at is the more diverse that the tent becomes as far as gun ownership. Um, the more the cliques and the groups become an issue, and so I think that's why it's important to stay aware that they exist.
Yeah, yeah, and they're getting people together to make so make it known that you do have common interests. And whether it's at a local gun store, local gun range, or a gun club, or at a conference or at a gun show. I know when the Liberal Gun Club exhibited at the SHOT Show one year, it was great. It was a great time for them because a lot of people were like, "Liberal gun owners, what are you doing here?" And they not everybody, a lot of people said, you all shouldn't be here, but a lot of people were like, "Hey, what do you guys do?" Like, "Oh, you're pro 2A, awesome, welcome here." So those kinds of opportunities for either organic or manufactured conversations I think are great, and I try to speak to as many people as possible, and represent a particular point of view, even though at the end of the day I don't think it's required that we all agree. There
Mhm.
even as a country 340 million people, all from different backgrounds and interests and lifestyles, and whoever said that we all have to agree on everything, right? Other than maybe just the rules of the game. And I think gun ownership is kind of the same. If there are 85 to 100 million gun owners, who knows? That's a lot of people to expect to agree on a lot of things.
True, true. I do want to get off into kind of your story a little bit, David. But before I do, I want to take a break real quick here. Got to do this and say thanks to, if I can find it, Anderson Manufacturing. Big shout out to our friends over at Anderson. And what last episode of the podcast was with Anderson Manufacturing. They're really shaking things up. And if you want the lowdown on what's going on over there and the changes that's going to be made in the very near future, good changes, by the way, to that company. Yeah, once you get done with this podcast, if you haven't already, back up and check out that one. But they're doing some awesome things. As far as rifles, they're well known for, of course, the scary black rifles. And they've got a plethora, a smorgasbord of options over there. And then they've got those in the 308 flavor as well as 5.56 and 300 blackout. You've got the carbines in 9mm. Then you've got the handguns, the Kiger handguns. And going to be revealing something with my Kiger here in the next coming couple of weeks. I've said it forever, but my Anderson Kiger, phenomenal little handgun. So make sure that you jump over on all the socials and see what they're up to over there at Anderson Manufacturing. They're at Anderson Manufacturing, or at least should be on most of the socials. The big X, they're at Anderson Rifles. So let's get David back in here. Um, yeah, we kind of went off on a little tangent there, but you were kind of starting out to, I think, to tell kind of how you kind of come to the realization of firearm ownership and stuff. And I kind of wanted to go down that road a little bit if you would be so kind.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so 2010 was really a pivotal year for me. I was not looking to get involved with guns. I was in North Carolina, so guns were starting to kind of be on my radar more. And I was in Georgia with my son for a tennis tournament. It was on a rain delay, so we're stuck in our hotel. And I just started flipping through the channels. I didn't have cable at home, so it was always exciting to see everything that was on the TV. And I came across this show called Top Shot. It was the
Oh,
first season of Top Shot, and I just started watching. I recognized Colby Donaldson from Survivor, and I was like, "Oh, that's Colby, and what's this about?" And then, I just started watching people using firearms in ways not only that I had never seen before, because I never saw people using guns except in movies, but in just incredible ways, like the challenges that they set up, the marksmanship, shooting over the shoulder, aiming with a mirror like Annie Oakley. And I always remember Chris Serino driving a nail with this old 19th century revolver. And so I just was like hooked at the TV spectacle, and it was one of those marathons, just back to back to back episodes.
Oh.
Probably watched like 5 episodes in a row while we're sitting there in the hotel. And it didn't leave an impression like, oh, now I have to go get a gun and become a marksman. But it was just seeing guns used in an interesting and normal way kind of planted this seed again of like, okay, my real estate agent has a gun, and this guy who works in tech, who's with my tennis partner, has a gun, and like guns are everywhere. So it really kind of became this background for thinking about how guns could be normal, right? They weren't yet normal for me, but I saw that they were normal for a lot of people. And then later that fall, I had an encounter in my apartment parking lot where one of my people who lived in my complex was being accosted near her car, and I had my 2 little kids with me, and I stepped over to intervene in that, just kind of asking if she was okay. And the guy sort of turned and looked at me in a way that, in my privileged, suburban, highly educated life, never had anybody look at me before, and basically told me to mind my own business. And I was like, hey, I don't want any trouble. I got my kids with me. And I realized I had like sort of with good intentions to be a good Samaritan and neighbor, gotten myself into a terrible situation that I had no real response to. So I went, to our apartment. They went to her apartment. Next day, pounding on my door. She's at my door now, completely disheveled, said he threatened to kill her, took her phone and car. I brought her in my apartment. And then I was like, crap, I just brought her in my apartment. My kids are in here. So then I quickly took her out of my apartment. She called her dad and then called the police. The police 30 minutes later showed up and took a report, and she dropped the charges. But I was left with this realization of, a different aspect of the world, the possibility of violence in the world, and my, inability to respond, and, not just to protect myself, but to protect my kids. Because I was like, this guy knows where I live. He knows that I got involved and talked to the police. And who knows what he's capable of. So, that kind of combined with this sort of general sense of, guns being out there, sort of, I think, opened up the possibility. Now, that was October 2010. I didn't shoot a gun until January of 2011. So it wasn't like, crap, I got to protect myself and my kids. I better go to the gun store. But, those things in that period, really from 2005 to 2010, but really in 2010, all laid the seeds for that transition into gun ownership. So it was quite personal, but also, an evolution.
Well, I do got a follow up, but we do have a question out there from the armed attorneys. So good to see them out there. Question for you says, Doctor, have you seen any evidence to suggest that gun culture disengage as infringements are removed, i.e., constitutional carry reducing enthusiasm for the Second Amendment movement?
I haven't seen that. I mean, I think that in the places where constitutional carry has gained ground, these tend to be the more red parts of the country that are more pro 2A overall. And so I see it more just as a kind of package of momentum for more liberal gun laws, really, to allow people to, carry more easily in more different places. So, I don't think that constitutional carry states have any less enthusiasm for the 2A. And, I certainly don't see it at the individual level. And there actually can be ways, I think, that, as these new gun owners are drawn into gun ownership largely for defensive purposes, there's some evidence that their attitudes towards gun regulation soften some, not to say that they become, pro 2A absolutists, but, as they become gun owners and they ease into that reality, they do come to see the value of having more permissive gun laws. I think we saw this really in California, where people were really anxious to get guns in March of 2020, and they realized the long process that they would have to go to acquire a gun in the state of California, and they weren't happy about it.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're right in that. And thanks, by the way, to armed attorneys for that question. Um, that I think you're dealing with a certain amount of people don't know what they don't know, right? And so you may have firearm owners that are not, you know, maybe they only, own the proverbial shotgun for duck hunting or whatever it is, right? And so they don't really own anything for defensive purposes, so they don't understand all of the different laws and regulations and, well, we'll just say infringements because that's what they are. They don't understand all the different infringements that are out there until they start down that path, right? But they have to start down that path really before they understand, whoa, this is a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. They get a concealed carry permit and then they realize how difficult it is to carry legally, if you want to stay within the bounds of the law, how difficult it is to carry a gun all the time. I work at a university, it's not legal for me, according to the school's policies, to conceal carry on campus. So, if I want to, put a gun on in the morning, drive to the perimeter of campus, get out of the way, store my gun, drive onto campus, do my day thing, drive off of campus, put my gun on. Maybe I, want to go to a bar and have a drink. While I'm in North Carolina, I can go to a bar, but I can't drink, right? Take the gun off, store it, go into the bar, so like the practical reality is, and even in a permitless carry state, there are many restrictions on when and where and how you can carry. So I think, that this, I'd say from the gun owner side, a lot of this is not known until you have to go through it. From the sort of anti-gun side, it's like, oh, people can carry guns everywhere and anywhere. And I'm like, have you tried? Because it ain't that easy. Like, now I know people who are like, screw the law, I'm just going to carry wherever I am because, boo-hoo if I get a misdemeanor for carrying somewhere I can't carry. But I don't really want to lose my job. That would impact my life, in a pretty devastating ways. Every person obviously has a separate set of considerations, but it is challenging. And I think people who, try to live with guns, in these ways realize, well, this is still pretty darn restrictive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what was it, Obama that said it was easier to get a Glock than a library book? I think that was him that, that said that. So,
yeah. Anybody who says it's easier to get a gun than X has not tried to get a gun. I think we agree on that, right?
I could assure you, yes, and especially not in some states,
Oh,
right? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know. I've had conversations with people before. Because here in Texas, which is a license to carry now, and of course we've got constitutional carry. We don't have to have that, but it substitutes as your NICS check, basically as your background check. So if you have that, you literally walk. It's about as easy as a library card because you walk in, you buy what you want, you show them you hand them your thing, you fill out the paper. You still have to fill out all the papers inside them, but fill out the papers and you walk out. Like it's kind of like a TSA pre-check, I guess, for those out there listening that may not quite understand how that works. And a lot of people are against that, though. A lot of people, when I know that here in Texas, kind of the armed attorney's point out there, I think passing certain things can make folks even more staunch to because I've seen that. We got constitutional carry here, and then now people are railing that, well, why do you still have the license to carry? And to me, that's a pro 2A stance.
Yeah. I think that this is an area where there's a lot of interesting potential. One of the reasons we have licenses even under permitless carry is so we have reciprocity in other states. So until you have 50 state permitless carry, there will be a place for those licenses. But but it's definitely when I started writing about kind of the history of concealed carry laws, which is one of the first things I tried to get my mind around when I was studying contemporary gun culture. I was talking about permitless carry as this thing that's maybe on the distant horizon. It wasn't even the central component to what I was writing. And, you know, by the time I'm, you know, writing things for this book or things I'm working on right now, I mean, permitless carry is here, you know, 28 states, right? More than half of states have permitless carry. Now, maybe we'll never get past 30, but that 30 is a lot more than the 4 there were back in 2012.
Mm-hmm. Or what worse, Texas not having it for as long as Texas didn't have it. That would blow people's minds when because Texas is always, for whatever reason, kind of held up as this bastion of gun culture. And, you know, when you look back, you know, 10, 20 years ago or so, and people would say that, you're like, like we're working on it, but it's not nearly as good as it could be. You
Right.
forget that Texas was blue for a very, very, very long time. And honestly, we started moving in the right direction too. It was still pretty blue. So that's one of the good things, I guess, about having those you know old school Democrats, much different than a lot of the liberals in their mentality and stuff nowadays. And unfortunately, it's the blue has went to that liberal side more often than not nowadays than your working class, you know, Democrats that used to make up the majority of Texas. But
Yeah.
and that makes the 2A fight just that much more difficult, unfortunately.
Right. Right. Yeah. You know, I think that, you know, we have this sort of underlying, you know, sort of polarization where, you know, you have gerrymandered districts, so they're not competitive elections. So if you're running, you basically have to win your primary, which pushes you to, you know, whichever extreme, if you're, you know, red or blue. And, you know, so the red gets redder, the blue gets bluer. And then there's, you know, less people talking across those divides. And then you, in that situation, you just throw guns in and it's the perfect wedge issue, right? You like, you don't even have to know where someone is politically. You just ask them where they stand on guns, and then you know where they are on all of these other issues. And I think that's unfortunate to have such an important part of our history and culture be a political wedge issue. And, you know, this is where you know, when I do talk to liberal gun owners, I say, you know, I understand the voting is complex for you because you have a lot of issues that you care about, including guns, but at least be visible as a liberal gun owner, and at least, you know,
True.
talk to your representative and say, hey, look, I can support you on 9 out of 10 issues, but why are you putting so much emphasis on this one issue? And honestly, as you said, you know, Democrats, in part because of that, but for many other reasons, are, you know, losing a lot of blue collar Democrats, losing, you know, rural Democrats in North Carolina, you know, for all the gains Democrats have made in the urban and suburban parts of certain parts of North Carolina, they've lost all of that in rural North Carolina. And the gun issue is a big part of that. And, you know, so like if I talk to either people who are politically active or politicians or just average liberal gun owners, I say, you know, let your, you know, even if you end up voting for them, let your politicians know that you are not happy with this position. And, you know, the more liberal gun owners, you know, take that stance, maybe, you know, it becomes less of a wedge issue for the Democratic Party. Well, maybe not nationally, but at least locally.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And I think that's where the hardest fights, I think, need to happen locally, right? I sort of believe in a trickle up effect in a way. I mean, if you've got all of the states agree on X, at the end of the day, it's going to be really difficult for the federal government to overreach. You know,
yeah,
that's just my thoughts on it. But
yeah, I mean, so much, especially firearms laws. You know, we talk about,
right.
no federal firearms laws, or like very few. You know, Gun Control Act in the 30s and 68 and a few others, but, you know, there's lots of firearms laws locally, you know, and so if you're, you know, you can definitely be active working on those issues in your local setting.
I want to jump back a second here when you were talking about you talked about being in the hotel room and watching Top Shot, which is really neat, and you know, kind of having a little moment there, and then the issue with your neighbor and the issue she was in. So I'm curious because you used a word that I really love hearing people use, or phrase rather, which is like planting the seed, right? Um, so when that happened, or maybe even with subsequent events that kind of led you down the road to gun ownership, um, did anything ever click back to a previous event, and was one of those watching Top Shot?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that as I tried to figure out, well, how did I get here, which was, pretty remarkable for me because again, 42 years of life is a long time to go without ever becoming involved with guns. So, as I reconstructed how did I get here, I realized how important Top Shot was, but there was no sense at the time like, oh, this is a turning point in my life. It was just, wow, that was really fun to watch, and it was a great way to pass the time during this tennis tournament. So it was very, it was kind of in the far background, and really like guns were so much off the radar for me that, like I said, even when I was in this frightening moment in my parking lot and in the aftermath, even though I was rethinking what I had done and what I could do, my first response wasn't, oh, I should get a gun. It was lots of other considerations. And, so there was like these little moment by moment, but really the biggest turning point was going to the range, and the way I got out to the range was, speaking to a friend who I later married, who was talking about, being in the Coast Guard and how she carried a Beretta and how she qualified as a marksman on the rifle. And I was like, man, how could you do all these things with guns? I would have never thought that you of all people. And I don't know why I thought she was in the Coast Guard and wouldn't use firearms. I thought they're just riding around in boats or something. But that's how far outside of, guns I was. I didn't even occur to me. So she set it up for one of her high school classmates, who's a gun trainer for the North Carolina Highway Patrol, to take me in his backyard basically and show me how to shoot. So, that moment of shooting and not kind of recoiling from the experience, but sort of leaning into it and enjoying it, that was the pivotal moment. And then I could see all these other kind of moments that were in the background that made it possible for me, I think, to sort of lean into that moment rather than being like, okay, that was enough. I know how a gun works, and that's all I need to know.
Right. Do you think that it has anything to do? People tend to fear, shy away from, be hesitant with things that they can't control. And so, do you think that maybe that has something to do with if you take control of that firearm out on the range, and you know what it's going to do, you know how to use it, you know what to expect, there's no unknowns, that sort of thing. Do you think that has something to do with people's mentality that starts to change their mind about gun culture?
Yeah, because honestly, if you don't know how any object or anything works, right, it can be frightening, right? And we know that there are negative outcomes that happen with firearms, and so if all you know are that there are these negative outcomes and you don't know how the thing works, right? I think it's sort of natural to be apprehensive about engaging that thing. And one of the things, because that experience at the range was so significant to me, when I teach this course in my department on the sociology of guns, on the very first day of class, before we even meet on campus, we go to the gun range. And students are given the opportunity to shoot a 22 pistol, a 9mm pistol, and an AR style rifle. They're not required to do it, but in the last several years, all the students have taken the opportunity, including the majority of the students who have almost no experience with firearms. And a lot of them are very apprehensive, and they're like, I'm so nervous right now. And I just tell them, like, you should be nervous because this gun is a lethal weapon, right? If we use it inappropriately, then someone could get hurt. And so, but then the familiarity, as you're suggesting, after they shoot 10 rounds through a Ruger Mark III, and they're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And it's actually kind of exciting to hit the metal plate, even though I've never shot a gun before. And then, that builds up their confidence to try the 9mm. And they're like, whoa, that was a lot more. But I still, feel like what we're doing is safe. Some of them do feel empowered by the experience. They're like, wow, that was powerful. And then, moving up to the rifle, and, that's, still a bit more powerful, also a little bit easier to shoot, which we talk a lot about. So, they come out of that experience not completely changed in their views of guns, but they have a more realistic understanding of, okay, this is what firearms are like. This is what it's like to shoot. This is how loud they are. This is how hard or easy it is to shoot them, and that basis really allows them to engage the issue through the whole semester better. And I think, we've all had the experience of taking someone to the range who has no experience shooting, try to give them a good, safe, enjoyable experience, whether they become gun owners or not. At least they'll remember, okay, now I feel a little bit more comfortable with guns.
All right. Hang tight just a second. David will come right back, but we've got to take our next break here real quickly and talk about craft holsters. So big shout out and thanks, of course, to Craft Holsters for helping out with the podcast about walking around money is what they provide. That's what I'm always talking about. And old war craftsmanship, Italian leather, German thread, absolutely beautiful, and a little bit on the budget minded side too. My recommendation: look for some sales. And I'm going to tell you, no matter what you need, some lovely leather to wrap around, whether that's a revolver, semi-auto, the barbecue gun, the daily carry, if that's your preferred method of carry, Craft Holsters, they've got it because they've got a ton of stuff. Not just the stuff, but they've got the knowledge too. So make sure to check out their site for leather care and maintenance and all the good things that you need to take care of your products, of course, from Craft Holsters. So we've got some questions out there, David. So I'm gonna kind of run through a few of those, if you don't mind, real quick. I said I was gonna do that. Here they are. We've got, first of all, I'm gonna get Wes's comment up here because he's in Oklahoma. He says we had a Democrat state rep that was very pro-gun and even showed up to our local gun rights groups meetings. But all other issues, he had the typical liberal view. So I certainly understand that. And then G Webb's here has got a couple of questions. We'll get those. These are directed, of course, to you, David. It says, first one, when would gun culture 3.0 look like?
Well, I mean, gun websites, what a big supporter of my work he is. I mean, he thanks for coming in and hanging out here and asking the question. And any place I'm looking for support, he's always giving it. So
he's a good dude.
Yeah, we've never met before, but hopefully someday. This is a natural question. If I talk about gun culture 0.0, 1.0, and 2.0, 2.0 being defensive gun culture. So it naturally raises the question, like what's next? And I'm a little bit reluctant to predict, just because it's hard enough just to understand what's going on today, much less predict the future. But I think that there are some possible futures are, that gun culture 3.0 is something new, and I think if there was one candidate for what that culture would be, it would probably be, something around the political rights of guns, right? So a kind of Second Amendment pro-gun rights culture, and that could bring in a lot of defensive gun owners. It can bring in recreational shooters. It can bring in hunters. It can actually even potentially bring in people who are not even gun owners, but support other people's rights to own guns. So, I think that kind of culture actually, exists already, within the current situation. And, I have to say, like, this idea of gun culture 2.0 that I stole from Michael Bain isn't meant to say that all gun culture is defensive. It's just meant to say, like, this is maybe the heart of gun culture today, or the dominant thread. There's still all of these other like you said, we were thinking about the tent. There's all these cliques in there. Maybe just the biggest clique are defensive gun owners. But another big clique in there are people who, are really, their main involvement with guns is in the arena of gun rights. They love to use their guns. They also are defensive gun owners and that sort of thing. But I think, to the question, I don't know when that would be, but I think the most likely candidate for a new evolution of gun culture would be around gun rights, separate from, these other activities.
I would like to see, I think, more of a melding of the groups. And when I say groups, what I mean is groups in relation to the use of a gun, right? Your competitors, your hunters, your collectors, your just the straight up 2A people. What other, the defensive use, right? That's kind of what I would like to see, because I still see some rift with people with a why do you need that, or why does that exist, or especially if you go to something like an industry show, like a SHOT Show, where there's new products and new guns popping up all the time, and you hear that a lot, like, oh, why would somebody want that, or why would somebody need that? And it's like, we got the Second Amendment, that's why, like, if they want it, it's there for them to do whatever legal purposes they want to use it for. Like, let's get off of this thing of, oh, they're just a competitor, or they're just a hunter, or we're all gun owners. Like, can't we just kind of come together around that? And I think that would create a more welcoming situation too for other people to come in, right?
Yep.
Because we don't have anybody looking down their nose or turning up their nose, depending on which way you want to put it, I guess, at what type of firearm, what type of gun, the first gun that person bought, and for what reason they bought it. And it's like, hey, you're a gun owner, cool. What do you use yours for? Well, you go, oh, you shoot competition, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think that the future of gun culture is going to be dependent on people owning guns, right? And if you have a diminishing number of people who own guns, there could be still defense of the rights of a small minority of people, but it's easier to defend your rights if there are more of you doing it, or you're speaking for more people. So this speaks to the need for inclusion, to constantly be bringing new people into the fold. And being more welcoming would definitely help that. I've been in a lot of gun stores and at a lot of gun ranges that didn't feel exactly welcoming, and all of the internal squabbling doesn't present the best face either. So this is another thing when I talk to gun owners. I say, like, you don't know who you're going to be talking to who is a potential gun owner, right? So always it's not an obligation that gun owners have to represent gun culture positively, but if you are concerned about that, be aware of how you might be coming off to people, because you don't know, how you're going to influence people, right? It could be someone that you're having coffee with, like I was with, my future wife. And, if she was an asshole about it, then I might not have asked her to, hook me up with her high school classmate to learn how to shoot a gun. It can be as simple as that, like, don't be an asshole.
Savage out there real quick. He says, you learn on a 22 soon. When you're ready, you'll want a 44 Magnum. I don't know about that, but
yeah,
but definitely want more. I think that is a thing for sure.
Yeah. I feel like, when my students shoot that Mark III, it's such a big and heavy gun relative to the 22. It almost, they almost feel like they're not shooting a gun, because it's so, it's quiet, there's no recoil. So it's not until they, I think, shoot the 9mm, they feel like, oh, now I'm shooting a gun. Right. And then when they shoot the rifle, they're like, oh, okay, that was different also. Right. But yeah, it's, it's hard to shoot 22 all the time, I think.
I shoot more 22 probably than anything else. But I grew up shooting a lot of 22, got decades in competition and youth shooting sports and other things with 22. It's just it's a part of my life, I think. So but there's a lot of people that once they kind of graduate beyond 22, they don't ever go back. I do know that. I see that a lot. So
well, when I'm at the gun store buying ammo, I'm definitely thinking about shooting my 22s.
Right. For fun, I mean, why not get out as cheap as you can get out, I guess, if you just for having fun. You have thrown out another question out there. Says, does anyone study the sociology of the anti-gun type, casual and extremists?
No, I mean I mean, there are some people who study sort of the gun control movement or the gun violence prevention movement, but it's almost a little meta because most sociologists are kind of part of that. So it almost be like we're studying ourselves. Now I have thought about, now that this book is done, should I extend my work to maybe do that kind of thing, to say like what is really the underlying motivation of the folks who are super committed to a particular agenda, what makes them tick. I oftentimes sort of complain about how New Yorker writer goes out and spends some time at a gun range and then writes about how this curious odd people who are so different from them, and then someone said, well, how come nobody from the gun side goes out and tries to understand better what gun control activists are doing? And I was like, what, fair question. I think that probably because most sociologists aren't interested in that, but I did plant a seed. They're going back to the seed planting. Planted a seed in my mind as would Brady let me come and sit in on their strategy meetings? Would Giffords let me hang out behind the scenes and listen to how they talk about guns and gun owners? And I'm not confident that they would, but I think if I could get that kind of access, it could be sort of interesting.
Well, I think that with the anti-gun movement, I think there's a lot of well-intentioned people. Their slogans, the headlines. I mean, who doesn't want to save a life? Who doesn't want to protect a kid? Who doesn't? Right? I mean,
that's a great.
So, but I think and it's a bigger problem with our culture that extends way beyond just guns. That we've got a lot of folks that they are not good at critical thinking. They're not good at doing their own homework, right? They don't really embrace the individual. Trying to figure out how to say it. The individual spirit, let's just say, that I see was part of the founding of this country, from the Revolutionary War to all the way up to packing up the wagons and heading west. We've got a lot of folks like that just, I don't know if it's society that's broken them down, politics, some type of, intersection of the two, what's going on. But I guess what I'm saying is you got people that's got really good slogans that may or may not have nefarious means behind those, and then a whole lot of people that blindly follow.
Yeah.
And that's a lot. And that's a lot of movements, to be fair. It's not just the anti-gun movement.
No, I think you made an incredibly important point, which is, and something that we should also bear in mind, is like, these are fellow citizens, and we should we don't have to respect the positions they're taking, but we may approach them thinking that they're taking those positions for a reason, right? Maybe some more educated than others. But again, if your whole experience and understanding of guns is from the negative point of view, like you see these negative outcomes, right? Why would we expect you to have a super positive view of guns? So, to say, hey, I don't agree with your conclusions, but I understand, why you're taking the positions you are, and maybe I can help you give me that same respect. Like you try to understand why I take the positions I do. And then again, it's not about agreeing on the same policy prescriptions as much as walking away from that interaction thinking, okay, there's some mutual respect there, and then maybe that pays dividends down the road when, as a gun owner, you're harder to demonize because they're like, I remember I talked to that guy and he listened to me. He took seriously what I was saying. He gave his views, and that was all right.
Well, it's all part of it. It's interesting that you kind of went down that road, because I had a note here from a long time ago that I was going to try to hit on before we got out of here, as we're closing up on the top of the hour again. But and it had to do with planting that seed, and it's something that I'm not going to take credit for this. I didn't come up with it. I know somebody else has mentioned it, and it's been an evolving work in progress. But something that I've talked about for a while. was planting the seed. And when you get into a conversation with somebody that maybe they're anti-gun, or maybe they're even on the fence, maybe they're agnostic about it, it's always better to walk away from that conversation, leave that conversation um, it, as civilly as possible without burning any bridges.
Mm.
And the reason is that you planted that seed, like you've made your points, and everything. Leave on as friendly a term as you can possibly leave on, because later down the road, that person is going to continue to have life experiences, and as they continue to have those life experiences, one day something's going to happen, and hopefully it's not tragic. It's not what I'm saying, but
Right.
something's going to happen. Maybe it's an interaction like you had with a neighbor. Wasn't nothing, traumatizing for them, yes, but not for you. And they're going to think back to that seed, right? They're going to think back to that conversation they had with that. Hey, that guy was pro gun and he was all friendly, and he told me, I probably should get a handgun for self defense and take some training and all of this, and maybe and that could be days, weeks, years later. We don't know. So, I'm a big proponent of not burning bridges any more than we have to. Now, that being said, there's some really hardened anti-2A activists that it's almost impossible to have a conversation with them that you don't burn bridges, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You have to pick your battles and, recognize, who you're dealing with. But I always remember, Tony Simon.
Oh yeah. Big
2A driver. And he said one time, don't just meet people halfway, go 60% of the way. What does it cost you to go 60% of the way in order to cultivate some of those positive emotions down the road? And like you said, you never know when those seeds you plant are going to come to fruition. And I'm also reminded of my dad always when, I was a dumb kid, whenever I'd be going to do something, he'd be like, remember, you're a Yemeni, and whatever you do reflects on all Yemenis.
Oh.
And, it's, I think being a gun owner, or I take being a gun owner some of that same way. Like, people know I'm very visible as a gun owner in my community here, especially at Wake Forest University. Right. So every interaction I have with people, they are thinking of me as both who I am and also as in some ways representing gun owners. So I try to represent gun owners as well as I can in whatever situation I'm in.
Mm-hmm. I guess we'll start winding it down a little bit, David. I got a lighthearted question though. I was going to ask you, how long have you been wearing bow ties?
Well, I have been wearing bow ties since I was in graduate school, so back in the 1990s. But the thing is I wanted to wear bow ties in high school. I went to a public high school near the beach in California, and I wore a tie and oftentimes a coat to school for my last 2 years of high school, because that's just who I wanted to represent as. And I always wanted to wear a bow tie, but I could never figure out how to tie them. And I'd get these little things that they give you at the men's store that show like a little cartoon of the person tying the bow tie, but I could never do it. So as soon as someone taught me how to tie a bow tie back in probably 1995, I've been wearing bow ties quite frequently since then.
Yeah, that's awesome. Teach a man to fish. Why not?
And I've tried to go places not wearing my bow tie, and people ask me where my bow tie is. So I'm like, really, I mean, I can't. I'm like stuck with this now.
Hey, there's worse vices to have, right?
I think so. I think so. To be known as the bow tie guy is not terrible. Well, now in the gun community, there's competition, but within sociology, there's less competition for being the bow tie guy.
Nice. David, I want to give you a couple of minutes or whatever you need here, I guess, as we're closing down. We really didn't talk about the book. So I want to give you a minute. If folks want to check out the book, where can they find it? All that good stuff. If they want to follow you, are you on the socials? Where do you have a website? All your different plugs that you need to give. Feel free. Take as long as you need.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. The book is Gun Curious, and it costs $20. You can get it wherever you buy books. Amazon's probably the easiest place to find it. If you want to learn more about the book, you can just go to guncurious.com or Google Gun Curious. I have a website that really lays out a lot of information about what the book's about, why I wrote it, and that sort of thing. But it really, it tries to tell the story of American gun ownership and gun culture truthfully and honestly and fairly, largely from the perspective of me, getting into guns, as a 42-year-old, and talking about my journey into gun ownership, accumulating a reasonably sized arsenal of guns. I take up the question of AR-15s, concealed carry, the risk of gun ownership, gun training. So it really is, telling the story of American gun culture through my journey. I'm an academic, but it's written, I think, for a general audience. And so, that's the plug for the book. I'm still working in the area. I'm trying to figure out, next steps. If you want to know anything I'm up to, just go to davidyamani.com. That's my sort of personal landing page. And you can, learn about things I'm doing. Like I run a virtual book club where we read books about guns. Last spring, I did a public webinar about guns. All that information is there. You can watch those videos. And I'm trying to distance myself a little bit from social media, just because it inspires a lot of negative feelings inside me. But I do, I hang around on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram now and then. So you can find all those, guncurious.com, davidyamani.com. Those are the keys to the kingdom right there.
Well, hopefully one of these days soon, we can cross paths, as the kids say, IRL.
Yeah, that's right. For sure.
But thanks, David, for hopping in, spending about an hour with us. We absolutely appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate the time and the platform. I'm sorry to the folks in the comments. I was saying before we started, I can't multitask. So if I start looking at the comments, I'm going to lose track of the conversation. But I appreciate everybody tuning in, and also for the platform and the opportunity to talk to your audience.
Well, I think we got them taken care of, David. So take care, and we'll talk soon, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Good night, everyone.
And with that one, we are going to we're going to call this one done. We've got a few more episodes of the podcast obviously left, but you're not going to see a podcast drop after this one for probably a week, maybe a little over a week. Why? Because we're headed to Wichita, Kansas for TriggerCon. So we got that event that we've got to take care of. But when we get back, I think we got about 3 episodes left in this season. So more to come. Just got to take a little break. That's all. Shout out again. Big thanks to, of course, Anderson Manufacturing and Craft Holsters. So make sure if you see those folks around the interwebs, you tell them thank you for helping out with the podcast, because it's greatly appreciated. As far as replays go and all that good stuff, Firearms Radio Network, the CloverTac podcast channel on YouTube or Rumble. I think that's all I've got. And we'll see you later. Bye.
Thanks for hanging out with us for another CloverTac podcast. To find all of our projects, swag, and more, visit CloverTac.com. Remember, you can help support our efforts by becoming a YouTube channel member. Stay safe, and we will catch you on the next one.